Hey friends, I'd like to introduce you to an American preacher named Louis Giglio. He's an evangelical Christian, but even so, some of you atheists and scientists out there may be familiar with him. He became quite famous for a while with his little story about how molecules testify to the existence of God.
It's like the rebar of the human body. The steel they put in the concrete when they lay the foundations of things, it's that stuff. It's holding your membranes together. It's the glue of the human body, Louis. It's laminin. You got to tell them about laminin. And I'm like, I promise you, I'm going home and tell them about laminin. And I'm sure when I do, revival is going to sweep across the church and probably around the world when I tell them. He said, no. You got to see laminin. I'm like, okay, let's see it. He said, no. You need to go look it up online. You need to go Google laminin. I don't even know how to spell laminin. Takes his card out. He writes on the back, Laminin. I'm like, okay, I cannot wait to get to my computer and get on Google, click on images, type in laminin, and I'm waiting, and these little thumbnails come up on the screen, and I'm like, wow. That's laminin? The cell adhesion molecule. Woo! I am so excited. I am beside myself. I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I love laminin. I'm so fired up. You should see laminin, I guess. That's the thing, right? Okay. Here is a scientific diagram of the laminin cell adhesion molecule that's holding your body together right now. Okay, this is what I found right here. No, come on, that's crazy. That's just crazy.
Part of that is true. The laminin molecule is sort of T-shaped, but it's kind of floppy and the arms bend around freely. It would be more apt if Jesus had been nailed to a rubber crucifix. Many molecules have sidearms. It's also true that it's an important cell adhesion molecule, but it's not the only one, and there are lots and lots of cell adhesion proteins. It's just that when your religion has a holy symbol that is so simple that a 5-year-old can make it with a pair of popsicle sticks, it's fairly easy to find natural phenomena that can make a crude match with it. Giglio should have kept going with his metaphor, though. Laminin is a heterotrimeric glycoprotein that is capable of both homophilic and heterophilic interactions. So if we're supposed to see its existence as proof of God, then God is smiling benignly down on gay and openly poly relationships. Several years ago, when the Giglio phenomenon was making the rounds of the skeptic atheist websites, though, it was seen as a good example of how our brains work, although it most definitely is not evidence of Jesus. We all have pareidolia. We process visual input through our past experience, and our brains tend to impose patterns where no pattern exists. We try to map the unfamiliar onto our knowledge of the familiar. So, we see animals and root vegetables. This is one of the more innocuous examples I found. If you Google funny-looking vegetables or attend a county fair, it's surprising how often gardeners pull up tubers that remind them of genitals. We even assign personalities to coat hooks, or we see bunny rabbits in the clouds. This is not at all ridiculous. We have pattern-matching minds, and it's what we're good at. What is ridiculous, though, is when someone tries to attach cosmic or vast religious significance to a subjective experience. When someone makes the leap to claim that a vague similarity in a noisy stimulus allows them to fill in the dots and conclude that the pattern in their brain is actually a signal from the universe. It says they don't understand psychology or human minds at all, or the universe. Which brings us to the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson. He makes the same naive mistakes as Louis Giglio, only this time, way too many atheists are nodding along in agreement. I have to show you a remarkable clip from one of his lectures.
This is from China. So this is Foxy and Nuwa. I think I've got that right. But I just love that representation. It's so insanely cool, this representation. So you see the primary mother and father of humanity emerging from this underlying snake-like entity with its tails tangled together. I think that's I really do believe this, although it's very complicated to explain why. I really believe that's a representation of DNA. So, and that representation, that entwined double helix, that is everywhere. You can see it in Australian Aboriginal art, and I'm using the Australians as an example because they were isolated in Australia for like 50,000 years. They're the most archaic people that were ever discovered, and they have clear representations of these double helix structures in their art. So, and those are the two giant serpents out of which the world is made, roughly speaking. It's the same thing, you see that in the staff of Asclepius, which is the healing symbol that physicians use, although usually that's only one snake, but sometimes it's two. So that's a Chinese representation. And then there's this. That's the Egyptian representation. We talked about the Egyptian story the other day, right? We talked about Isis and Osiris. So there they are, cobras. Their tails are twined together. See, they emerge out of that. That's the dragon of chaos that manifests itself as culture and nature. That's the representation. That's unbelievably cool. So,
who knew the ancient Chinese also pilfered Rosalind Franklin's X-ray crystallography data? Peterson plainly really does say this. I really do believe this, although it's complicated to explain. I really believe that's a representation of DNA about this Chinese illustration. It is nonsense to the highest degree. It is a disgrace to history, anthropology, and art. No, the artists were not illustrating DNA. They had no idea what DNA is. They were creating images of their mythology. Why would you dishonor their intent by pretending they were doing something they were not? Maybe if Peterson had some understanding of postmodernist critical analysis, he wouldn't say something this stupid. It's a disgrace to biology. No, that doesn't look the slightest bit like a DNA molecule. For one, the strands would have to be anti-parallel, head to tail and tail to head. For another, the key feature ought to be the internal pairing of bases. It's a sequence of nucleotides that carries the information in the molecules, and it's the complementarity of the two strands that provides a mechanism for replication. I mean, seriously, this is Watson and Crick's 1953 description of DNA. It's detailed and explicit. To suggest that the Chinese illustration bears any resemblance to DNA is ludicrous. I look at that image and see zero insight into biology, but there ought to be plenty of insight into the Chinese culture of the time. Does Peterson provide that? No, he short-circuits the whole thing with that blithering drivel about DNA. And here's the thing, this is the whole of Peterson's substance. He makes a metaphor and then he reifies it. He makes a shallow comparison of two things, asserts their identity in contradiction to any actual evidence, and then concludes that his poorly drawn analogy is significant and real. The Chinese drew a pair of god snakes with their tails intertwined. It looks vaguely like a DNA double helix to someone whose knowledge of biology is a millimeter deep. Therefore, the Chinese knew about the biochemical structure of deoxyribonucleic acids. Lobsters use a common neurochemical, serotonin, as a transmitter, and so do people, and therefore lobster behavior is a useful model of human behavior, and all of Peterson's authoritarian claims about the rightness of hierarchies are correct. It makes sense to him that a witch lives in a swamp, and that they are absolutely real because they represent an abstract category that exists in the human mind. Therefore, you must accept his metaphor, because if he thinks it, they are categorically valid concepts. Forget evidence, forget reason. It is the misconceptions of Jordan Peterson that define his reality, and he'd like you to join him in the muddled chaos inside his head. By the way, I have to say this. Louis Giglio is just as wrong and just as irrational as Jordan Peterson, but of the two, Giglio is the far more dynamic and charismatic speaker. The only difference between the two is which one is affirming the preconceptions in the listener's head. If you want to hear a testimony about the righteousness and universality of Jesus, Giglio will oblige. If you want to hear a testimony about the righteous superiority of the white man, Peterson will validate you. Just don't mistake what either of them says for any kind of rational, logical, evidence-based support for your biases. You should ask yourself why you aren't taken in by Louis Giglio's brand of baloney. But why are you less skeptical when Jordan Peterson demonstrates exactly the same rhetorical games and logical fallacies? Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.